This is the story of what was possibly the most abused amateur radio repeater in the UK, South London. But before we get started, this video is a precursor to two other videos I made last year. One about a radio jammer dropped from a plane, and the other about the anti-repeater group, which I'll link at the end of this and also below. The UK London FM group was formed on the 4th of January 1972 and was eventually responsible for the running of GB3LO, London's first repeater. In September of 1974, GB3LO was at Epsom Downs in Surrey undergoing testing before being moved to its home at Crystal Palace in March of 1975. The first test transmission from the new location took place on the 4th of March 1975 at 18:33. From the very beginning, the sort of thing that went on GB3LO divided three ways. Firstly, the chaps who used to foul up top band transmissions. Secondly, those who jammed the repeater for idle entertainment. And thirdly, licensed amateurs jamming deliberately because they didn't like the concept of repeaters. The practical result was an equal mixture of hot temper and hot air, with a bit of tyre slashing thrown in for good measure. One operator in the 1970s decided that he would go as far as to make a weed killer bomb and attach it to the underside of a repeater abuser's car, with a trigger wired to the PTT, so when he keyed up his radio, it would blow his car and him up. Luckily, the RF trigger device was too sensitive, so the idea was given up. There was two other stories circulating amongst repeater users during the late 1970s, which I can't confirm, but I'll tell you anyway. Propaganda material given out by the anti-repeater group urged people to use tactical jamming techniques on the air. This meant comments and interruptions between overs, which led to legitimate users losing track of who was who, so jammers could call break and be let in. Rumour had it that G3TCO had a heart attack due to the stress he received from the repeater one evening and apparently died microphone in hand. Another alcohol-induced incident was a suicide by a radio amateur who came on the repeater saying he was going to kill himself. He naturally got no sympathy from the jammers who said he didn't have the bottle. The amateurs on the repeater were trying to persuade him not to, but they were being jammed by the squeakies who were taunting him. He was found the following day by police in his exhaust-filled car. GB3LO was nicknamed Loony Operator, and despite it being filled with these jammers, Idi Amin impersonators, music blocking the input channels and even death threats, it was joined by more repeaters. In 1979, the Home Office agreed in principle to 3 more repeaters for London. These were to be located at Hillingdon, GB3WL, Enfield, GB3NL, and Havering Atty Bower, GB3EL. The infamous GB3LO would become GB3SL and move to another frequency. The theory was that more repeaters for London should cut down the interference and give a better service. However, cynics suggested that it would only give more scope for the squeakies, whispering willies and granddads that frequented 2 metres. Their words, not mine. By 1980, the cynics were proven right, as use of the repeaters by licensed amateurs was steadily declining, and most evenings and weekends, GB3SL in particular, was taken over by pirates and frustrated CBers. Few of the call signs given actually existed, and the view from local amateurs was that since the Radio Society refused to close down the repeaters, and the Home Office seemed either unable or disinterested in a concerted crackdown on offenders, the only resort was to lobby their respective members of Parliament. The Post Office and the Home Office had a problem. The Home Office had to catch the culprit in the act, which was all but impossible at this time. The Home Office was required, in the case of licensed offenders, to act on the part of the law, with their sentence being cancellation of the licence. Amateurs took the view that repeater groups affected by foul-mouthed and jammers should hold a so-called DF skunk hunt with a substantial prize should good results be achieved. GB3LO was renamed GB3SL by the 1980s, and in 1980 it was taken out of service by the operating group at Christmas and was silent during January. The reason for the shutdown was given as technical, but that was questionable. Nevertheless, it was back on the air, serving its clientele of both licensed amateurs and pirates by February. The deliberate interference on the London VHF repeaters continued unabated throughout the early 80s, with GB3SL at Crystal Palace being still the worst affected. Listening in on any evening revealed very little meaningful traffic. Those genuinely wanting to use the repeater to call up a friend were deliberately denied the chance by jammers, and the playing of tapes containing call signs and remarks was almost constant. When its sponsorship lapsed in the late 1980s, it was quite a long time before a new group would agree to take responsibility for GB3SL. However, many expressed their relief when the repeater was recommissioned, because, as they put it, it keeps all the dirt in one place. There was a danger that some of it may be flung at the other repeaters. These were hard words for the earnest sponsors of GB3SL to hear, because they wanted to see their particular repeater used with the restraint and intelligence that was evident on most others. As predicted, the repeater abuse continued throughout the late 1980s, and it left local amateurs asking what exactly was being done to curb repeater abuse. Well, much to the disbelief of many, quite a lot. The National Society had its own methods of identifying offenders via snoops, and the Radio Regulatory Division of the DTI caught many of them, and heavy fines with costs resulted. It said it welcomed evidence of serious abuse of the amateur bands and would take action against offenders. Over the years, the repeater got such a bad reputation that it was taken off the air several times, and eventually forever. By the 1990s, Stephen Spivey, who was the head of the Radio Communications Division of the DTI, tried to reassure amateurs that abuse of the airwaves was no laughing matter, and that the Radio Investigation Service were now taking a very hard line on such abuse. On the 31st of October 1994, during late morning, amateurs in London heard someone using foul and offensive language towards a French citizen who was visiting the country and working through GB3SL. The Frenchman was suddenly subjected to a tirade of abuse and racial insults, which continued for a minute or two until a strong signal jammed it out. After this, the abuse could only be heard in short bursts, as the unknown jammer listened to see if any further jamming was necessary. This continued for another minute, and then the repeater went quiet. It was believed that the amateur responsible for the outburst was often on the Malvern Hills repeater. He assumed a woman's voice and often made offensive remarks to other radio amateurs, and he also took delight in making comments towards the DTI. Eventually, and only due to high operating costs at Crystal Palace, GB3SL was closed down, and the name was later given to a repeater in Scotland. Let me know if you have any memories of what was possibly the most abused repeater in the country.